There are a ton of townhouses going up around New Zealand, so is it worth buying one and are they a good investment? That's what I'm going to talk about in this video, including the bad things about townhouses and the mistakes people make when they actually go out and buy a townhouse. Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. I'm Ed, an economist and property investor here at Opes Partners. And the good news is that 3 of my investment properties are townhouses. So this video is based both on my data side as an economist, but also my experience as a property investor. And through that experience, I've seen both the good and the bad things about townhouses. And when we talk about a townhouse, usually we're talking about a block of properties built on one piece of land. And these days you typically own that land underneath your townhouse, and then you might share in any common areas. And it's really important to be upfront about my own biases because firstly, I'm a townhouse investor, and then my company, Opes Partners, helps investors buy new build investment properties, and some of those properties are townhouses. Now, that does mean there is an incentive for me to tell you that townhouses are the best thing since sliced bread. You should absolutely go out and buy one, and if you don't know what you're talking about, but I'm not going to do that. This is going to be an honest review based on facts and data, because here's the truth. Some people should absolutely not buy a townhouse. In fact, you might be much better off investing in an apartment, a house, or a piece of bare land, depending on your strategy. And speaking of land, townhouses usually don't come with a whole heap of it. So if you want a property where you can add an extension, or you want to bowl over a house and build a new one, well, a townhouse just is not going to be the right fit for you. Because think about it, townhouses are typically connected on one or both sides, so you can't rip a townhouse down and replace it with something different because that's going to impact your neighbours and is probably going to be against the Residents Association rules. On top of that, there might not be enough land to build much anyway. So if you're looking for a property that you can bowl down, build something else, townhouse is probably not going to be the right fit. On top of that, if you're looking for something with a really high rental return and you want to earn a passive income off a property, again, you're probably not going to invest in a townhouse. You're probably better off buying either an apartment or a dual income property. Now, that's where you can have multiple tenants within the same property. And because of that, those sorts of properties tend to have higher rental yields. Now, townhouses, they do go up in value faster than apartments, but they don't have the highest rental yield. And you know what? Some people just aren't comfortable investing or buying a townhouse. Maybe you're worried that there are too many being built. After all, there are 7 times more townhouses being built today than there were back in 2012 as a percentage of all homes being built. They've gone from 7% of all new houses all the way up to over 40%. And no matter what sort of house you buy, any investment has to pass the sleep test. If you're going to be so worried about this townhouse that you're losing sleep, don't invest in it. Buy something else that you're more comfortable with. But you've also got to be really careful about not falling into the townhouse trap. These are old wives' tales that you sometimes hear and they sound correct, but they're actually not true. They are fallacies, which is a flaw or error in reasoning that it might sound logically sound at first glance, but upon closer examination, they fail to hold up. And one example of this is you'll sometimes hear people say that townhouses are more difficult or take longer to sell. And the logic goes that, let's say you buy a property and it's in a development of 20 townhouses. And maybe all 20 of those townhouses have the exact same look and layout. Well, what happens if someone else is trying to sell their property when I want to sell my one? Well, you've got 2 identical properties trying to sell at the same time. That's competition. So maybe it's going to be more difficult to sell. But do we see that happening all the time? Do we see that in data? If we go back as far as 1992 and look at any month and compare how long it took to sell a house compared to how long it took to sell a townhouse, the median difference between these 2 groups is exactly 0. And if we take the average, which can sometimes be more skewed, the average difference between these 2 groups in terms of selling the properties is 5 hours. So it might take 0.2 days more to sell a townhouse compared to a house. So that idea is a fallacy. It sounds true, but on closer inspection, it doesn't stand up. That's the townhouse trap. Another example is when people say that townhouses don't go up in value as fast. And again, here's how that logic typically goes. You go to sell your property and you own one of 20 identical units again. Someone else in your development is selling at the same time as you, and let's say both properties are worth 550K. But if that other seller in your development is really desperate, then maybe they're going to discount their price to 525K. Then other buyers see that that property sold for 525 and they use that to negotiate your house price down. So that competition, maybe it keeps prices down. And I wanted to find out if that was actually true as part of my work on the Property Academy podcast. And what we found is that sometimes houses do go up in value faster than townhouses, and sometimes it's the other way around, townhouses going up in value faster than houses. Now, there is often a difference, and the data does show us that houses do go up a bit faster in value than townhouses. But it is not that houses go up in value by 6% a year and townhouses are closer to 3%. No. It's more like that if a house goes up in value by 7% a year, a townhouse might go up in value by 6.4% a year in Auckland. And this will kind of blow some people's mind, because this idea that if we think about a house, what goes up in value more, the house or the land? Cool, most people will say the land. So don't buy a townhouse, buy a house that has more land. That's the thinking. But do properties with more land actually go up in value faster? Well, it actually turns out that not many people have gone out and got this data in New Zealand. So I hit up my friends at CoreLogic and wrote this article for One Roof, showing that the answer actually isn't that clear cut. Because properties with less land tend to be closer to the city centre, and land typically goes up in value faster if it's closer to the city centre. So if you buy a property with less land, but it's closer to the middle of the city, yeah, you might have less land, but your land is more desirable. So you can get a similar amount of capital growth. And again, I'm not trying to tell you to go out and buy a townhouse, because I just told you all of the reasons not to go and buy a townhouse before. And they're definitely not right for everyone. But it's important to be really careful of the townhouse trap. Fallacies that sound true, but are based more on anecdotes rather than data. And if you want to see more of these videos, do me a quick favor and hit the like button. That's how I know if these are actually the types of videos you want to see more of. And I get that you might be thinking, okay, Ed, so if these are all the reasons not to buy a townhouse, why are some of your investment properties townhouses? And the reason is that on the whole, they're more affordable. So townhouses in Christchurch have been about 22% cheaper compared to a house over the last 10 years. So they are more accessible for first-time investors and home buyers. And as I mentioned before, townhouses are growth properties rather than yield properties. It means that they tend to go up in value faster than something like an apartment, but they do have a lower rental yield. So as I've been trying to grow a property portfolio, I'd rather buy something I can afford to get that extra asset rather than wait to get something more expensive later on, because the banks might change their lending rules and say, we're not going to lend you the money anymore. And I think if your choice is between a townhouse near the centre of the city or a house further out, well, you've got the option to have less land with the townhouse, but it be in a better location. And we know that generally, suburbs closer to the centre of the city, they tend to go up in value faster than those that are further out of the city. And another funny thing is, I've recently had Stuart Donovan on the Property Academy podcast. He's got his PhD in economics from over in the Netherlands. And he was talking about two major demographic trends that are happening in New Zealand. First, us Kiwis are having fewer kids. So the number of people living in each house is going down. And that means we don't need as much space. The second big demographic trend is that we're getting richer over time. So he shared this concept that he's got of compact quality, that we as New Zealanders are moving to better quality houses, but smaller houses. So when you see lots and lots of townhouses going up, it's easy to spot that supply and say there's a lot of supply coming. What's harder to see is the underlying demand for those houses. Now, if you do decide to go out and buy a townhouse, how do you do it the right way? The first thing is we're going to look for areas where property prices tend to rise faster and also give a better rental return. So let's take a suburb like Mangere in Auckland. It's had faster house price growth than a suburb like Takanini. And properties in Mangere tend to have higher rental yields than somewhere like St Heliers. So the first step is to find properties in the right areas that have that mix of high growth but also decent rental yield. And you can get all of this data for the major cities in New Zealand for free on my website, opespartners.co.nz. I'll link the area analyzer down in the description. There are also some places where townhouses just do not work. And it's typically the smaller cities and towns where everyone is used to living in a house. So in Invercargill, our most southern city, houses are really cheap, at least compared to most of the rest of the country, and there aren't that many townhouses around. So if I was investing in Invercargill, I'm way more likely to invest in a house. And it's the same for a lot of other small towns in New Zealand. So a townhouse just wouldn't be appropriate. But if I go a few hours up the road to somewhere like Queenstown, well, land and houses are really expensive. In fact, Queenstown has the most expensive houses in the country. So there is a big demand for more affordable housing there, and that is the reason I've currently got a townhouse under construction in Queenstown as a rental property. So if you're going to invest in townhouses, it's got to be appropriate for the area, and it's probably going to be in a place where properties are a little bit more expensive, because that way you get that affordability advantage. And one of the big mistakes that people make is they hear that concept of compact quality and they think, great, I'm going to go and buy a luxury townhouse. And there are a lot of developers who come to me and say, Ed, we're going to build a bunch of townhouses to sell. Our point of difference is we're going to make them really high end. And I think that is a big mistake, because the whole point of buying a townhouse is that they are more affordable. So what's the point of building a property that is substantially more expensive, because you then lose that affordability advantage? And again, this doesn't mean that you should go out and buy a townhouse. But if you do, you need to be informed about the downsides, the upsides, and the mistakes that people tend to make. And we've got to be aware of that townhouse trap.